Before the war ended, before freedom rang, before the Japanese surrendered, there was Bataan. And in Bataan, there was a march. Not a parade, not a tactical retreat, but a forced, merciless death line. Over 60,000 Filipino soldiers and more than 10,000 Americans were herded like cattle through jungle heat, starvation, and brutality. It wasn't just a war crime, it was a human tragedy that burned itself into history. The Bataan Death March wasn't only a test of endurance, it was a lesson in pain, loyalty, and survival. This is not just a story of defeat, it's a story of dignity under the shadow of cruelty. And those who survived it never walked the same again. The Bataan Peninsula was never supposed to fall. It was the last stand. The Alamo of the East. Filipino and American troops, under the United States Armed Forces in the Far East, USAFFE, were ordered to hold the line. And they did, for 99 days. Malaria, dysentery, and dwindling rations haunted them as much as the Japanese. On April 9, 1942, with supplies gone and soldiers too weak to fight, Major General Edward King Jr. surrendered the Bataan garrison to avoid a slaughter. But he didn't know he was trading one horror for another. The Japanese saw surrender as dishonor. The captured were not soldiers anymore, they were less than human in the eyes of their captors. And so began the march, not to safety, but to brutality. They were told to march. No water, no food, just walk or die. Some had no boots, some crawled, then collapsed. If you fell behind, you were bayoneted. If you cried for water, you were struck down. If you looked up, you were slapped, punched, or worse. What was supposed to be a 65-mile journey from Mariveles to San Fernando became a hell march through open sun and unseen cruelty. Soldiers who once fought shoulder to shoulder now fell side by side. The Japanese guards were under orders to move quickly, and they enforced it with rifles, kicks, and unspeakable acts. At night, there was no rest, only terror. Many whispered prayers, some whispered farewells. Filipino civilians were warned, aid the prisoners and you die. Still, they did. They left coconuts by the road, dropped food into marching lines, risked everything for a chance to whisper, keep fighting. Some were caught, some were killed, but many saved lives with the smallest gestures. To the starving men, that rice ball wasn't just food, it was a lifeline. That cup of water wasn't just hydration, it was hope. In a sea of cruelty, these small acts of compassion became sacred. The Filipinos who risked their lives were unsung heroes, spiritual resistance fighters without weapons. There were no ceremonies, no last rites, just bodies. Men died standing. Some were forced to bury their friends. Others were buried alive for collapsing. The trail became a graveyard. One American soldier later recalled, every mile, there were corpses, Filipino, American, it didn't matter. We were just meat to them. And yet, men kept walking. Some held each other up. Others whispered psalms, shouted battle cries in delirium. The true terror of the Bataan Death March was not just the death. It was the attempt to erase human dignity along the way. Those who survived never truly escaped. Even after the march, they were crammed into boxcars, hotter than ovens. Many suffocated before reaching Capas. Then came prison camps, starvation, beatings, experiments. But the march never left their minds. They returned home skeletal and haunted. Some never spoke of it. Others wrote memoirs drenched in sorrow. Their survival wasn't victory, it was punishment prolonged. Yet even in their pain, they carried pride, not for the war, but for the brotherhood. For the Filipinos who marched and died as soldiers of a nation not yet free, and for Americans who stood by them in shared agony. In 1946, trials were held. Japanese General Masaharu Homma was executed for war crimes, but no punishment could equal the suffering inflicted. What mattered more was remembrance. The Philippines built the Mount Samat Shrine and the Capas National Shrine. America wrote books, filmed documentaries. But nothing truly captured the pain. That's why we must speak. Not to reawaken hate, but to preserve honor. The Bataan Death March wasn't just an atrocity, it was a crucible that forged lasting respect between two nations. And the blood spilled on that road gave birth to something sacred, memory. A warning, a vow that no march like that should ever happen again. When you walk on Philippine soil today, remember whose footsteps came before. They didn't walk for glory. They marched for survival, against their will, through pain most of us will never understand. But they marched, and in doing so, they didn't just endure history, they became it. To be Filipino, to be American, to be human, is to remember Bataan. And as long as we remember, they will never walk alone again.